Manhattan, September. At the most exclusive restaurant in the Upper East Side, billionaire Victoria Sterling laughed as she humiliated the waiter in Dutch before her business partners, believing he couldn't understand. She didn't know that Michael Chen, a single father working 2 jobs to support his daughter, spoke 8 languages. She didn't know he had a PhD from MIT. And most importantly, she didn't know he was the son she abandoned 25 years ago when she chose her career over a teenage pregnancy. When he responded in perfect Dutch, revealing her insider trading schemes and his identity, the color drained from the face of Wall Street's most ruthless CEO. In 30 seconds, an empire built on lies and abandonment began to crumble. This is the story of how an invisible waiter destroyed his mother with the truth. The Gilded Room sat 50 floors above Manhattan, a restaurant so exclusive that reservations were inherited rather than made. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Central Park like a living painting, while the city's elite conducted billion-dollar deals over plates that cost more than most Americans made in a week. It was the kind of place where power was currency and humanity was optional. Michael Chen knew every corner of this temple to wealth. 3 years of impeccable service had made him as invisible as the Italian marble walls, always present, never truly seen. The patrons noticed him as much as they noticed the baccarat crystal they drank from. Functional objects for their comfort, nothing more. That was exactly what he wanted. At 32, Michael had mastered the art of social invisibility. His black hair always neatly trimmed but unremarkable. His movements measured and silent, learned from years of knowing that being noticed in this world meant trouble. None of the clients he served would have imagined that this quiet waiter had a PhD in financial engineering from MIT, that he spoke 8 languages fluently, that he'd turned down offers from Goldman Sachs to raise his daughter after his wife died in childbirth. But most importantly, no one would have ever connected this man in the shadows with the name Sterling. That Friday in September started like any other. Manhattan's autumn light painted the white tablecloths gold, while the subtle scent of the rooftop garden's roses mixed with truffle oil from the kitchen. Michael was checking the table settings when the maître d' approached with the reservation book. He was a distinguished man in his 60s, one of the few who treated the staff with genuine respect. The name jumped off the page like a slap. Victoria Sterling. Table for 6. Business lunch with Dutch investors from Vanderburg Capital. Michael's hands remained perfectly steady as he continued folding the Irish linen napkins. Years of preparation had trained him for this moment. He knew it would happen eventually. The Gilded Room was where Victoria Sterling celebrated all her major victories, where she'd closed the deal that made her first billion, where she came to remind herself that she'd made the right choice all those years ago. The vanity of people like his mother was as predictable as market cycles. They always returned to the scenes of their triumphs, like sharks circling familiar waters. Michael had bet on this weakness, and he'd won. When Victoria Sterling entered the restaurant at precisely 1 o'clock, time seemed to slow. Michael observed from his station near the kitchen, studying the woman who had given him life and then erased him from hers like a bad investment. At 55, Victoria Sterling was the embodiment of American corporate success. Tall, surgically perfected, her blonde hair styled in that severe bob that had become her trademark. The Saint Laurent suit, custom-tailored and worth $20,000, fit her like armor. The Cartier watch on her wrist caught the light as she gestured, each movement calculated for maximum authority. But it was her eyes that Michael studied most. Those green eyes she'd passed to him, cold as emeralds and empty as abandoned buildings. 3 men in equally expensive suits followed her, clearly European from their bearing and complexion. They laughed at Victoria's remarks, with that forced laughter of those who knew their financial future depended on her mood. The group was led to the best table, the corner spot with panoramic views of the park. Michael waited for the right moment, then approached with the silver tray and leather-bound menus. Victoria didn't even look up. To her, he was furniture. Her voice, when she spoke, had that casual command of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. She ordered the most expensive wine without consulting her guests, a 1947 Chateau d'Yquem that cost $8,000 a bottle, a power move disguised as hospitality. It was while serving the appetizers that the cruel show began. Victoria, apparently bored with the financial discussion, decided to entertain her guests at the waiter's expense. She switched to Dutch with the fluency of someone who'd studied at Amsterdam Business School, believing herself safe behind the language barrier. Her voice took on that tone of amused superiority that Michael remembered from the one time he'd seen her, at age 7, when she'd come to verify he existed before signing away her parental rights. She began commenting on his appearance, speculating loudly about his pathetic life, inventing humiliating stories to make the Dutchman laugh. She said he probably hadn't finished high school, that men like him existed only to serve people like them. She bet $1,000 she could make him drop something before dessert. The Dutchman laughed nervously, some visibly uncomfortable. Jan van der Berg, the eldest, tried to steer the conversation back to business, but Victoria was on a roll. The alcohol from the expensive wine amplified her natural cruelty. She told them how she was planning to buy the restaurant just to fire all the staff, starting with this pathetic single father who probably can't even afford daycare. Ah, that's when it happened. Michael set down the wine bottle gently, straightened with a dancer's grace, and responded in Dutch. Not schoolbook or hesitant Dutch, but the perfect Dutch of someone who'd lived in Amsterdam, with a Leiden accent that betrayed higher education. The words came out like silk-wrapped razors, each syllable calibrated for maximum impact. He revealed he knew about the insider trading through shell companies in Rotterdam. He mentioned dates, figures, names of Cayman Island accounts. He spoke of the SEC investigation she didn't know was coming, the whistleblower in her own company she hadn't identified. And then, with the same calm used to announce the daily specials, he added that he was the son she'd abandoned 25 years ago, when she was a teenage intern who chose her Harvard MBA over motherhood. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the Manhattan traffic seemed to pause. Victoria Sterling, the woman who'd destroyed companies and careers without blinking, appeared to turn to stone. Her complexion went from power lunch pink to corpse white in seconds. Her hands, always so steady when signing corporate death sentences, shook visibly. The Dutchmen looked at each other with expressions moving from confusion to alarm. Van der Berg was the first to react, rising slowly from his chair as if facing an unexploded bomb. Michael maintained his professional smile, the same smile he'd perfected over 3 years of silent humiliations. But his eyes, those green eyes identical to his mother's, burned with a fire that had been building for 25 years. Through the restaurant's vast windows, the first FBI vehicles could be seen pulling up to the building's entrance. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't luck. It was the result of 3 years of meticulous planning, sleepless nights gathering evidence, pain transformed into flawless strategy. The FBI doesn't arrive randomly at places like the Gilded Room. When the black SUVs stopped at the building's entrance, every table already knew they were about to witness a spectacle that would feed high society gossip for years. Special Agent Rodriguez entered with the authority of someone holding all the cards. She was a woman in her 40s who'd dedicated her life to hunting white-collar criminals, one of those federal servants who couldn't be bought. Her eyes immediately found the corner table, where Victoria Sterling seemed to have shrunk 3 sizes. The Dutchmen were already standing, gathering documents and phones with the haste of those wanting to dissociate from an impending catastrophe. Van der Berg whispered something urgent in Dutch to his colleagues, and Michael caught the words fraud and immediate departure. They didn't need translation to understand that the $50 million deal was dead before birth. Victoria tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. For the first time in 25 years, she truly looked at her son. Not the waiter, not the obstacle to her comfort, but Michael. Her young boyfriend James's features were all there. The angular jaw, the slight Asian features from his Japanese grandmother, that dimple that appeared only when he was serious. How had she not seen him for 3 years? Agent Rodriguez approached with studied calm. In her career, she'd arrested senators, CEOs, even a Supreme Court justice's spouse. But this case had something special. The story of a son taking down his mother had struck even her hardened heart. The arrest was executed with theatrical precision. The charges read aloud echoed in the silent restaurant. Securities fraud worth $500 million, insider trading, money laundering, RICO violations. Each charge was a nail in the Sterling Empire's coffin. As agents cuffed Victoria, she stared at Michael with a mixture of horror and something resembling respect. The baby she'd considered an inconvenient mistake had played her like an amateur. He'd waited, planned, and struck with a sniper's precision. The restaurant emptied quickly. The wealthy have a sixth sense for scandal and know when to disappear. Only the owner, Mr. Fitzgerald, remained, watching from the kitchen door with an indecipherable expression. When they were alone, Michael slowly removed his apron. His hands didn't shake. He'd imagined this moment so many times that reality seemed almost disappointing. Where was the satisfaction? Where was the joy of revenge? Fitzgerald approached with 2 glasses of whiskey. He was a man who'd seen much in his life, who'd served senators and mobsters, saints and sinners. He knew the weight of untold stories. The elderly owner revealed he'd always known who Michael was. James Chen, Michael's father, had been a line cook in this very restaurant 26 years ago. A brilliant young man working his way through college, when he'd had a brief affair with the teenage Victoria Sterling, who'd been interning at her father's firm. After Victoria had given the baby up,
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
and James had died in a car accident trying to get to the hospital for the birth, Fitzgerald had kept track of the child through the foster system, through the full scholarship to MIT, through the wedding, and the tragic loss of his wife. He'd hired Michael 3 years ago not out of pity, but for justice. He knew Victoria would return, drawn like a moth to the flame of her glorious past, and he knew Michael had the right to face her. The following weeks transformed Michael into the most sought-after person by American media. The waiter who toppled Wall Street, the tabloids called him. David versus Goliath in designer suits headlined the Times. But he refused every interview, every book or movie offer about his story. He didn't want fame. He'd wanted only justice. The real challenge was explaining everything to Sophie, his 7-year-old daughter. How do you tell a child that the grandmother she'd never known had chosen money over family? That the woman on TV in handcuffs was connected to them by blood, but not by love? Michael chose truth, age-appropriate, but honest. Sophie, with the wisdom children sometimes possess, simply said, "She missed out, Daddy. We're pretty awesome." During this time, an unexpected visitor appeared at his Queens apartment. Margaret Sterling, Victoria's mother, a woman Michael had never known, existed. She was in her 70s, elegant in her simplicity, with eyes that had seen too much. Margaret told a story the newspapers didn't know. How Victoria had been raised by a father who taught her that love was weakness, that success was the only measure of worth. How she'd watched her daughter choose ambition over everything else, including her own mother, who'd been placed in a nursing home and forgotten. Margaret had tried to find Michael for years, but Victoria had hidden the adoption records, erased every trace. She gave Michael documents proving his right to his grandfather's inheritance, money Victoria had stolen through forged documents. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to ensure Sophie's education, to buy a small house, to start over. The trial began 3 months later in the Southern District of New York. The courthouse was besieged by journalists from around the world. The story had captured public imagination. The billionaire ice queen and the abandoned son, hubris and nemesis in a drama worthy of Greek tragedy. Michael testified for 3 days. His voice remained steady as he detailed not just the financial crimes, but the abandonment, the casual cruelty, the lives destroyed. He described finding his father's diary, learning about a young man who'd wanted to raise his son but had been threatened with deportation if he interfered with Victoria's plans. Victoria, in the defendant's seat, looked like she'd aged 20 years. Her dyed blonde hair had grown out gray at the roots, her face gaunt with the reality of her fall. When their eyes met during a recess, Michael saw something he didn't expect. Regret. Real, deep regret. But it was too late for forgiveness. The verdict came as expected. 25 years for Victoria Sterling. Asset forfeiture of everything. The end of an empire built on others' pain. But for Michael, the real victory came after. With his grandfather's inheritance and donations from honest business people disgusted by Victoria's actions, he founded the James Chen Foundation for Financial Crime Victims. It wasn't just a charity, but a resurrection center for families destroyed by people like his mother. The foundation's office was the antithesis of Victoria's empire. Warm, open, full of children's drawings and photos of rebuilt families. Every morning, Michael arrived first, made coffee, and read letters from those asking for help. They were stories he knew well. Abandoned spouses, forgotten children, families destroyed by greed. One morning, he received a visit that shook him deeply. Jennifer, the young analyst everyone thought was Victoria's protégée, came forward with her own story. Victoria had stolen her research, claimed credit for her work, then destroyed her career when she'd objected. She'd been blacklisted from Wall Street, unable to find work anywhere in finance. Michael hired Jennifer immediately. Together, they began gathering other victims of Victoria Sterling. There were dozens, then hundreds. Researchers robbed of their innovations, small investors crushed, pension funds raided. Victoria's empire was built on a cemetery of broken dreams. The foundation became a beacon of hope. Within a year, it had helped over 500 families. Michael discovered that transforming pain into help for others was the only real revenge against people like his mother. 2 years after the arrest, Michael received a letter from federal prison. Victoria's trembling handwriting filled pages with confessions and regrets. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She knew she didn't deserve it, but wanted him to know certain truths. She revealed she'd watched his life from afar, knew about his degrees, his successes. That pride had always fought with remorse, but pride had always won. She confessed to crying when she'd learned about his wife's death, but being too cowardly to reach out. The letter also contained information about hidden accounts, not for her, but for victims. Codes, passwords, safety deposit box locations. It was her pathetic offering of redemption, the only way she knew to say, "I'm sorry," through money. Michael used that information to recover another $100 million, all distributed to victims through the foundation. But he never answered the letter. Some distances can't be bridged with words. During this period, Jan van der Berg reappeared in his life. The Dutchman had followed the trial, the foundation's birth. He came to Michael's office with a proposal. He wanted to invest in the foundation, create a European network supporting financial crime victims. The man had learned his lesson. The near deal with Victoria had awakened him. Now he only invested in ethical projects, slept better, and had even learned English properly to stop hiding behind languages. His collaboration took the foundation international. One day, Sophie asked the question Michael had been dreading. "Do you think she ever loved us? Even a little bit?" Michael pulled his daughter close, this brave little girl who'd lost her mother at birth and never known her grandmother. "I think she loved the only way she knew how, badly. Some people are so broken they break others. But we're not broken, are we?" Sophie shook her head. fierce and determined. We're strong, and we help people. That's right, baby. We help people. The call came on a spring morning, 3 years after the arrest. Victoria Sterling had died in her sleep, heart attack, alone, as she'd lived her final years. The warden said in recent times she'd only talked about her son and granddaughter, living more in a past that never was than the present that was. The inheritance Victoria left surprised everyone. Everything to Michael and the foundation, with one clause. He had to personally retrieve a box she'd sealed years before. The box contained the past Michael had tried to forget. Hundreds of photos from her teenage years, her and James looking happy, ultrasound images she'd kept, a hospital bracelet from the day Michael was born, and letters. So many letters Victoria had written but never sent, dated throughout the 25 years of absence. In those letters was the other Victoria, the one who'd fought with herself, who'd started to reach out 1,000 times but always stopped. There was the woman who'd chosen empire over family and spent the rest of her life paying the price. The last letter, written the day before she died, contained just one line: "I chose wrong. You chose right. Sophie is lucky to have you." Michael cried for the first time in years, not for the woman Victoria had been, but for the mother she could have been, for the grandmother Sophie would never know, for all the love lost to ambition. The funeral was private. Just Michael, Sophie, Margaret, and, surprisingly, Jennifer and other employees Victoria had destroyed. They didn't come for her, but for Michael. Close a chapter. As the casket descended, Sophie squeezed Michael's hand. "Daddy, are you sad?" "A little bit, sweetheart." "Because she was your mom?" "Because she could have been so much more." Sophie nodded with the solemnity of a child who'd grown up faster than she should have. "We're going to help more people now, right? With her money?" "Yes, baby. We're going to help lots of people." "Then maybe that's her way of saying sorry?" Michael looked at his daughter, this wise little soul who could find grace even in abandonment. "Maybe it is. The foundation today is one of the most important in America. It's helped thousands of families, created stricter laws against financial crimes, given voice to the voiceless." Michael's office has 3 photos on the desk. One of his wife holding newborn Sophie, one of his father from the single photo he'd found, and one of Sophie at her college graduation, Harvard, ironically, but studying social work, not business. The Gilded Room still gleams above Manhattan. Mr. Fitzgerald died last year, leaving the restaurant to Michael. He doesn't work there anymore, but sometimes he takes Sophie to sit at that corner table, the one where everything began and ended. They look out at Central Park and talk about how money isn't evil, but loving it more than people is. The new waitstaff know the story of the colleague who brought down an empire. When a customer treats them badly, the new manager, a young man Michael saved from bankruptcy, smiles and says the phrase that's become legend: "Be careful how you treat those who serve you. You never know who you're facing." Victoria Sterling died alone and forgotten. Michael Chen lives surrounded by the love of thousands he's helped. That was his real revenge, transforming poison into medicine, pain into hope, abandonment into embrace. And somewhere, perhaps, a mother finally understands that the empire she built was nothing compared to the love she threw away. Her financial legacy is dust. The legacy of love Michael built with Sophie will last generations. Sophie is 32 now, married with twins of her own. She runs the foundation with the same quiet strength her father showed all those years ago. When her children ask about their great-grandmother, she tells them the truth. She was brilliant, but lost. She chose money over love. But Grandpa Mike taught us that real wealth isn't what you take, it's what you give. The corner table at the Gilded Room has a small plaque now, visible only if you know where to look. In memory of those who serve in silence, and those who learn too late that love is the only currency that matters. Your moment of reflection. Hit like if you believe justice always comes, even if it takes time. Comment with the moment that touched you most. Share with those who need to know that real power isn't in money, but in the courage to face truth. Subscribe for more stories that show how one person's courage can change many destinies. Because in the end, real empires aren't built on foundations of greed, but on acts of justice and compassion. And the invisible waiters sometimes see more than queens on their golden thrones.